Though she was one of the most enlightened women in Europe, Catherine the Great's public and private personas were very different indeed. She secretly collected sensually charged art and even furniture, but that wasn't all she was hiding. Catherine wasn't called the Great for nothing. She earned her title through blood, betrayal, and possibly murder. Her rise to power was unprecedented and legendary. More on that later. Catherine's private life is full of mysteries and scandalous rumors. Some say she kept her hairdresser in a cage to keep her wig a secret, while others insist that she advocated for having intimate relations at least 6 times a day, apparently as a cure for her insomnia. And then there is her infamous love of horses. Catherine the Great of Russia wasn't really Russian at all. She was actually born in Germany. Catherine caught the eye of Peter III, aka the heir to the Russian Empire, when Catherine was just 10 and Peter was 11. Even at the tender age of 10, Catherine knew she despised Peter. Pale and sickly, the nearly teenaged Peter still played obsessively with toy soldiers, all while somehow nursing a burgeoning drinking problem. Catherine would do anything, and I do mean anything, for that sweet, sweet Russian crown, including sticking it out with her dim-witted suitor, Peter. In 1745, she married her pallid fiancé Peter, officially becoming Catherine Alexeyevna at the tender age of 16. Quick-witted, gorgeous, and curious, Catherine soon found she hated her new dull husband Peter even more than she thought she would. At first, she turned to books to stave off boredom, devouring Voltaire and learning Machiavellian power moves. For a while, Catherine was satisfied, until she began to feel another urge entirely. Catherine and Peter filled their court with vibrant, good-looking nobles from all across the empire. This was a fatal mistake. Catherine's bored eyes wandered right over to the handsome Sergei Saltykov, and the pair began an affair. According to Catherine herself, Sergei was the man who took her virginity, not her husband. Catherine may have gone through with her miserable marriage to Peter, but the girl still had standards, and she refused to warm Peter's marriage bed. This led to a lot of awkwardness. Soon, Catherine found herself pregnant, giving birth to a bouncing baby boy named Paul. But the child hid a dark secret. According to Catherine, the baby was Sergei Saltykov's through and through, meaning the heir to all Russia was illegitimate. Surprisingly, historians actually disagree with Catherine for one shallow reason. Paul grew up stout and ugly, just like Peter III, whereas Catherine and her lover Sergei were reportedly 18th century hotties. While Catherine was gallivanting with Sergei, Peter was off on his own extramarital adventures, most famously courting the beautiful Elizaveta Vorontsova. There were even rumors that Peter wanted to divorce Catherine and to live happily ever after with Elizaveta. Interestingly, most historians don't lay the blame on Catherine for her lack of bedroom escapades with Peter III. Many experts believe it was Peter who was somehow unable to consummate the marriage, or else they think he could have been infertile. In the late 1750s, Catherine was pregnant again, this time giving birth to a little girl named Anna. Peter's response to the birth was disturbing. Apparently, he'd finally caught on to the whole cheating thing, and he refused to believe he was the girl's father, saying, "God knows where my wife gets her pregnancies." Sadly, Catherine's second child lived to be just 14 months old before the frail girl passed on March 8, 1759. To cope with the tragedy, Catherine almost never mentioned the girl again. According to several historical records, in order to become a lover of Catherine the Great, there was an intimate test. Before being welcomed into Catherine's bed, prospective suitors had to first satisfy Catherine's lady-in-waiting, the beautiful Countess Praskovia Bruce. But when Catherine found out the Countess was resampling the goods without her permission, The Empress's response was swift and brutal. Without batting an eye, Catherine sent her now ex-lover into exile, shoving Countess Bruce along with him. In 1762, Catherine's biggest ambition so far came true. Peter ascended to the Russian throne as Emperor Peter III, taking Catherine along with him as his consort. You may have heard that Catherine was incredibly fond of horses and spent much of the early part of her loveless marriage riding. Unsurprisingly, Catherine refused to ride side saddle and wrote, "The more violent the exercise, the more I enjoy it." This passion for horses would crop up again, if you know what I mean. Less than a half year after they'd become emperor and empress, Catherine and Peter were living in separate palaces. For years, she had been cultivating allies among her court for a coup d'etat, and she was now using all her alone time to put her ingenious plan in motion. She knew her attack had to come now. She marched down to the Russian regiment and begged the men to save her from her unhinged husband, which they happily did. Catherine detained Peter and forced him to officially abdicate just in case. Needless to say, Catherine's effective and brutal takeover of her own husband had the entire world in a tizzy. Catherine was holding Peter captive at the Palace of Ropsha when he suddenly fell ill and passed at the suspiciously tender age of 34. Although his autopsy stated that a severe attack of colic and a stroke were the culprits in his passing, much darker rumors swirled around his death, and Catherine was at their center. Some historians believe that given the convenient timing of Peter's end, Catherine had a hand in making sure he never came back to claim her throne. Another claimant to the throne was Ivan VI, an insane 23-year-old who had been locked up since he was a baby because his royal blood threatened the crown. So what did Catherine do to Ivan? She definitely offed this one. Oh, those Russians. Just months before her husband's downfall, Catherine was heavily pregnant with her third child, Alexei. And if you're thinking, how could she plot against her baby's father? Think again. Though there may have been some confusion around Catherine's first two children, her third son, Alexei, was definitely not Peter III's son. In fact, Catherine boldly went and named him after his true father, her macho lover, Grigory Orlov. Maybe Catherine was a little insecure about how she came to the throne because she was determined to prove that she could turn little, backward Russia into one of the most enlightened powerhouses of its day. She waged conflicts left, right, and center to expand the empire and modernize its cities and people. As I said, Catherine was a modernizing force in Russia. But in 1762, during a smallpox outbreak, even her most loyal courtiers said she had gone too far. Not content to merely patronize inoculation as a scientific method, Catherine put her money where her mouth was and actually got herself vaccinated against smallpox with the help of an English doctor. Oh, and she decided to inoculate her son Paul while she was at it. To everyone's shock and surprise, the inoculation actually worked. Catherine loved to dote on her many lovers and court favorites, but the same couldn't be said for her own children. One year, she gave her friend a 500,000 ruble present, but on his birthday that year, her son Paul got a watch, and a pretty cheap one at that. Naturally, things tend to get busy when you're trying to turn Russia into a modern superpower. But truth be told, Catherine was a pretty terrible mom. Paul wasn't just neglected on his birthday, he was downright mistreated most of the time. One day, when he was still a baby, he fell out of his crib and slept the night away unnoticed on the floor. Yikes. Whatever her faults, Catherine the Great had impeccable taste. The world-renowned Hermitage Museum at the Winter Palace started out as Catherine's own personal collection. More on Catherine's other personal collection later. In 1773, Catherine's violent past came back to haunt her. a group of peasants started to rebel. Their leader, Emelian Pugachev, claimed to be Catherine's late husband, Peter III, resurrected and looking for vengeance. After a year of Pugachev's rebellion, Catherine gathered an enormous force of men and crushed the rebels under her thumb. Then she came for Pugachev himself. She imprisoned him in a metal cage for all to see and ridicule, proving he was not the late emperor. Then she decapitated him in a Moscow square, and finally she had him drawn and quartered for good measure. Catherine's boy toys knew exactly what she expected from them above all else: total loyalty. One person who learned this the hard way was her Polish side piece, Stanisław Poniatowski. When Poniatowski was in her favor, Catherine gifted him with no less than the Kingdom of Poland, installing him as ruler. Shortly after becoming king, Poniatowski did a supremely stupid thing and decided to start rallying for Polish independence from Catherine. This did not sit well with the Empress. Catherine forced him to abdicate as punishment for his disloyalty. Stanisław was lucky to escape with his life. To say Catherine had a difficult relationship with her eldest son is an understatement, to be sure. Whether because he looked so much like his royal father, or because Catherine was threatened by his power, she never bothered to offer him a chance to co-rule. When Paul had a son of his own and Catherine became a grandmother, she did something truly awful to her firstborn. Unwilling to show Paul any kindness, Catherine planned to make her grandson Alexander her official heir, rather than choosing her adult son. It's safe to say that Catherine was addicted to collecting art. Catherine's classic collection soon totaled thousands, and she indulged in some spicier tastes too. While she played up her role as a chaste, enlightened empress to her people, she was hiding some naughty imperial activities. In private, she collected some hair-raising art, but the most scandalous parts of her collection weren't paintings at all. Apparently, an old boudoir of Catherine's was full of sensual furniture. These chairs and other items were decorated with expertly crafted nude figures, certain to make any onlooker blush. Catherine also employed full-time foot ticklers. In this respect, she was actually a traditionalist. Russian royalty long employed sensual foot ticklers who would provide relaxation and arousal. Catherine was infamous throughout Russia for her appetite in the bedroom, but her last lover still managed to raise more than a few eyebrows. Prince Platon Zoubrov was a whopping 40 years younger than the Empress. The pair hopped into bed together when Catherine was 60 and Zoubrov was just 22 years old. November 16th, 1796 was supposed to be like any other day. Catherine got up early, as was her habit, and sipped her morning coffee. But just hours later, everything changed. In the late morning, Catherine's servants found her Imperial Majesty lying on the floor, her face a lurid shade of purple. Her pulse was fluttering and her breathing was ragged. She quickly fell into a coma and passed soon after. Almost immediately after her passing, people started talking. Rumors spread that Catherine passed after having intimate relations with a beloved horse. The mighty Empress had actually succumbed to a brutal stroke, which was ironically the same ailment that was supposed to have killed her late husband, Peter III. Even so, the unsavory rumors about the insatiable Empress and her equine endeavors can't seem to be squashed even centuries later. Catherine's son Paul managed to become emperor after his mother, but just a few short years into a very unpopular reign, Paul was offed, making way for the heir Catherine had intended all along, her grandson Alexander, and so Paul met the same fate as his royal father. To this day, Catherine is Russia's longest reigning female ruler, with a reign of almost 35 years. By the end of her reign, Russia had risen to such heights that her rule is still known as a golden time for Russia. the Catherinian age. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more fascinating content.